you harbor me? Won't you harbor me, harbor me, oh, won't you harbor me, harbor me, three parts, okay? Oh, won't you harbor me, won't you harbor, harbor me, harbor me, oh, won't you harbor me, won't you harbor, harbor.
Back around 1975, I was working and very, very involved in the deaf community. And I got to be very close with a lot of deaf people and was really taken into their families, into their culture, and the whole thing. I had a new record of women's music, and some deaf friends came over, and I was right in the middle of listening to it for the first time, and I was so excited about what was on this record. I just said, I want you to know about this. Let me share it with you, and put the record on and very haltingly tried to interpret the music. And after I did the first song, my friend said, that's really on the record? Is that what they're saying on the record? They were really, really shocked. I mean, they were just I was very surprised the way they were watching, because I didn't think the response as intense as it was. And then the first time I signed music for hearing people who didn't know sign language, the reaction was real similar, not the surprise at the content, but at the expressiveness and beauty of the language. And they said, that's really the way deaf people talk and communicate with each other. It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. And so, and I knew then that this was a way to communicate between two cultures, that's really what I wanted to happen, and I saw that this was a way it could happen.
And it's using music and art forms, isn't it?
Right, right. Using music, which makes perfect sense, because hasn't music served that purpose throughout history as being a link, a way people could relate to cultures that they didn't know very much about.
Deaf people primarily use American Sign Language, or ASL. That's the same with me and my family. We're all deaf and we sign ASL. When I was growing up, people didn't know that ASL was a language. I didn't even know it myself. But now I work at Northeastern University, where we're researching and studying ASL and finding that, in fact, it is a language, as valid as any spoken language.
I've been trying to learn some signs working with Susan, because I have this teacher right here all the time, you know, so she's going to try to teach me how to sign this song. I always get so nervous, you know, because I feel so clumsy sometimes.
For example, in my family, my mother and father and two sisters are all deaf. I started signing when I was just a baby. I expressed myself easily in ASL at first, and later I learned to sign English in school. But I communicated in ASL, and I felt the same as anyone else. I talked, and they talked.
I grew up with an oral background where speech is very, very important. It was what's forbidden. Even if I say hello or wave, I would get hit. Sign language is forbidden. Speech was the most important thing, because my school believed that you are to grow up normal, so normal as much as possible to fit with the normal hearing society.
One woman weaves a message, singing the sound of silence. Stop, let's do that much.
I have to tell you this story. When I got accepted to go to college, on the first day of registration, my parents came with me. And we went in the hallway full of deaf people, all moving their hands. It was beautiful to see all these flying hands. I said, that's my people. Damn, my people. But not to my parents. Oh my God, look at the weird people in the hallway. They were pulling me to get out of the hallway. By the time we got to the parking lot, we were fighting like cat and dog. I'm holding on the other end of the suitcase. She had the other one, and we're pulling back and forth. No, I'm staying. No, you're leaving. I'm staying. No, you're leaving. Finally, my parents, okay, if that's what you want, you have it.
One woman.
One
One.
woman
Woman.
weaves. In Amazon, you would say signs.
Mm-hmm.
And keep your thumbs in here. And turn your hands up like this. That's it. Good. Okay, one weaves a message, signs a story. Good. I was born hearing and became deaf when I was 2 years old. I went to a strict oral school in New York, a very strict, very oral school. Some of us knew homemade signs, and later we learned sign language from the deaf children who had deaf parents. We had to sneak around, though, because if we were caught, we were punished. It was always like that. I was very confused about signing English or signing ASL. I'll tell you a story. About 3 years ago, I went to a convention in Chicago on ASL. There was an interpreter there signing in English. And at one point, a deaf man with a PhD, a brilliant man, stood up and he began to lecture in ASL, while the voice interpreter translated what he signed into spoken. As I watched his lecture, I realized that he was signing in pure ASL. I didn't know what to do. I felt embarrassed, and I said to the person next to me, "Can you believe it?" People were staring at him thinking, who does he think he is? He was saying, do you know ASL is your first language and you have a right to use it? He was using it. He has a PhD. And it's true, what he was saying was more clear. He had a point. I watched, and it began to really become clear to me. Even though still I had to struggle to understand that it was my language, I knew what he was talking about. That really changed how I felt about English. And what I'd like to do with it now is just toss it out.
Okay.
Let's do that part
Okay.
again.
One woman. How did you do that? Weaves a message.
A message.
I know
Singing.
this one. Singing. Oh, it's singing? No, that's right. Okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes
Singing.
I go left-handed. Singing.
The sounds, small. The sounds, quote, of silence. Okay, and the idea there is, instead of saying the sound of silence, as you would in English,
Mhm.
you're saying the sounds, and using the quotation marks means to give you the idea of, so
Mhm.
the sound of silence.
Oh, it comes from here.
And it also indicates that this is a metaphor.
I don't know how to compare it, except that I never really noticed there was a difference that my parents were deaf. I never noticed that there was a language difference. I just grew up signing. And I think it was maybe after I had gone out, played with other kids, gone into their homes, maybe then I realized that their parents were hearing and that there might be a difference in my house.
One woman weaves a message, singing the sounds of singing. I do this way. Sounds is this way. Sounds of silence.
One woman weaves a message, singing the sounds of silence. Another wheels her chair to the center of the stage, changing minds and attitudes with eyes that hear and hands that see. These women living, working independently. And I look to you for courage in my life. And I promise it's not just foolish idolatry that makes me that you in wonder. And this verse is for those women who have defied the fashion model standard, who are getting muscle and fat and a little obnoxious. So big and beautiful, she sets my heart on fire like a raging river in the moonlight of the dawn. She's the mother of my youth. She's the daughter of my age. This woman now and always, survival is her name. Healer of my pain, quiet in her face, goddess keep me sane. I look to you, I look to you for courage in my life, and I promise it's not just foolish. I got a tree that makes me gaze at you in wonder and love. Oh, there's something about the women. There's something about the women. Something about the women in my life. In my life, there are women. In my life, there are women. In my life, there are women in my life. Come sign with us, okay? Oh, there's in my life, there are women. In my life, there are women. In my life, there are women. In my life.
I learned recently that there are at least 14 million deaf people in this country, and that means people who were either born deaf or who became deaf at a very, very early age. It doesn't include older people who become hard of hearing later in life. So 14 million is a very small estimate, yet that is a very, very high number.
If hearing people look at me and think, ooh, she's deaf, then I feel the stigma of being labeled deaf. But personally, I don't feel that way about myself. It's how people act when they're with me that influences how I feel. All along, deaf people have always tried to fit in with hearing people. We've tried to do what they wanted us to do. We've learned to speak. We've tried to act like hearing people in so many ways. It's been that way for 200 years. Well, now I think it's time that deaf people should stop trying to act like hearing people. I think we should be ourselves. We should communicate in ASL, and we can go halfway, and hearing people should come halfway. They can learn to sign, we can learn about their culture, and they can learn about ours, and that's how we can live together cooperatively.
When I first started learning how to, I felt extremely vulnerable. I felt like I was talking so much more expressively than I had ever talked before, because for the first time I had to use my face and my body and my hands and everything, and I couldn't hide behind my words. My words were right here, very visible for anybody to see.
And you also have to really commit yourself to looking at somebody when you talk. You can't sort of go, well, yeah, and look the other way, or you miss the conversation. The other night, a woman who had been at the concert was very enthusiastic, and she wanted to talk, and she was being so committed to communicating with me, like really trying, knowing that I didn't know sign language, and wanting to talk about the concert and talk about herself and her life and the songs. And so she was doing everything she could to help me know what she was saying. And I was so conservative in my response. I found myself getting frustrated much too fast, rather than just sort of going out there and using my face and my hands and my body and my, jumping up and down, doing whatever I had to do to try to talk back and to really communicate. Instead, I found myself looking around the audience to see where Susan was, so that she could come and interpret for me. And I realized at that I have to start going halfway.
Being an interpreter, what kinds of cultural events do you think should be interpreted?
Well, my opinion is everything should be interpreted.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that deaf people, or really any person, should be eliminated from participating because of some kind of a barrier that doesn't necessarily have to be there.
What kinds of experiences have you had in your life related to that?
When I look back, I remember hearing stories from my parents, for example. When they were married, interpreting weren't available at that time. And I remember hearing that they had to stand there, and they went through all of the marriage vows, not really understanding what was being said because it wasn't interpreted, but getting their cues to say, I do. Another thing that I look back on is I remember when my grandmother died. I was around 10 years old, and at that time, not really sensitive to interpreting. And I remember my father sitting there, and we're being at the funeral, and nobody was interpreting. My father would sit there, and things were being said about his mother, but he didn't know what was being said. I wish that I could go back to that time and get up there and interpret. But it's things like that that people just don't think of.
I remember a while back when the Pope came to Boston, said the Mass. It was on television. There were thousands of people there. Anyone who wanted to could go and hear what he had to say. He had a message for the world. But my feeling is there was a group excluded, the deaf, because there was no interpreter on TV. There was nothing. We just had to guess while my hearing roommates could sit and stare in fascination.
I would sit by the TV, I would sit by the radio. I would hear it. I do have some hearing with the help of a hearing aid. I would hear it, but not understand what it's saying. Now, the concept of being accessible, beautiful. Beautiful. Someone to interpret everything that's happening in the room, to make me be part of it, to make me learn, and to make me appreciate art and media.
I took up the recorder. For 1 year I played it, and I felt so stupid. I didn't understand why my mother made me do it. That made me really hate music. Ever since, I didn't learn to dance. I didn't really appreciate poetry. Anything that was related to music, I refused to learn. Well, that was till about 3 or 4 years ago, when I met a woman here who sat me down and said, hey, I have this record I want to share with you. I want you to read the lyrics. I want you to know what it says. Well, I felt sort of hesitant at first because of my past experiences with music. But in my new life, I was trying to keep an open mind. So I thought, well, I'll give it a chance. We talked about it, and I was so excited. I could understand the meaning. With her translating it into sign language, I really could enjoy it. I really woke up, even though it took a long time. In the beginning, I was scared. But now, if a concert comes up with an interpreter, I would run there. It's really interesting. I've enjoyed it ever since.
I think it's real important for us to remember that it's wonderful that hearing people are being exposed to music being interpreted and getting to see American Sign Language, and especially getting to see someone like Susan do it, who's such an incredible artist as well as a good interpreter. But that in the midst of all of that, we need to remember the reason that we are interpreting the concerts into American Sign Language is for deaf people.
I remember the first time that I ever interpreted a concert for you, and when you sang the part of the song Nikolaya, the Harbor Me part, and asked that the house lights come up, and I saw people in the audience signing that with me, I was filled with tears. I was so moved because I felt like I wasn't just talking at people, that there were people who were, there was an interactive thing going on, and the language was being shared by everyone.
Right, a cappella. Won't you harbor me? Won't you harbor singing, okay? It's like what it's like to be deaf,